Jeff McNeil will start the season on the IL. Sean Manaea and Brandon Nimmo are on the mend. We got some quick injury notes to discuss on this live edition of Locked On Mets.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on X at Finkelstein Ryan. You can also find some of my writing at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. I'm actually heading into Port St. Lucie today to check out the Mets spring training game. Brett Baty will be getting the start at second base, and we might have to get used to that as Jeff McNeil is reportedly out for 3 to 4 weeks with an oblique strain. And this is a low-grade oblique strain. They're going to have him rest for a week. Hopefully that oblique is completely healthy and good to go, and then he can get right back on it and maybe have a short ramp-up to returning. And if that's the case, we could see Jeff McNeil back at some point in April. It might not be that serious of an injury. But what this does is it opens the door for Luisangel, Acuña, and Brett Baty. And those young players will now have an opportunity for the first, call it week, maybe 2 weeks, maybe a month of the season, depending on how McNeil ends up, coming along with that oblique, to really get a ton of run over at second base. Of course, if you wanted to play the pessimistic game, you can woulda, coulda, shoulda Jose Iglesias once again here, because it is pretty remarkable how anytime you think you have enough depth and you're covered in a spot, those injuries are generally going to show, and all of a sudden you realize we could have used that guy. But at the same time, this is, as of now, a short-term injury for Jeff McNeil. There's every chance that he's going to be able to get right back at it. And, even the middle of April, if it's only a month, he could be back very early into this season. You might not have thought anything of it by the time the year ends, but it's also a pattern that we're starting to see a little bit from Jeff McNeil. He's 33 years old now. And little injuries start to creep in a little bit more. Last year, he got hit with, what was that? Like a changeup or a curveball. Remember, the pitch came in like 75 miles per hour that hit his wrist, and it was like stunning that it somehow caught the bone right and broke it. It's not obviously an apples to apples thing to compare his wrist to his oblique, but it is just something to monitor. Does Jeff McNeil become more of an injury-prone player? And if he does, how do you handle second base? And obviously the answer is pretty clear with Baty and Acuña, but then it just eats into your depth everywhere else. I will say that this is now a team that is a little more exciting when it comes to young intrigue on opening day, because you're going to have one of Baty or Acuña in the lineup at second base. Sure, Donovan Walton or Luis De Los Santos might make this team. There is still that outside chance. But if they do, and one of the other guys ends up in Syracuse between Baty or Acuña, whoever is left behind will be the everyday guy. I still think the most likely outcome here is you now see both Baty and Acuña on the roster, and you got your options there. You can roll with Baty at times to give yourself the more high upside left-handed bat, and you have Luisangel, Acuña for defense. And so if the Mets want to as well, let's just say you do start Baty at second and Acuña's on the bench. If you got a lead and it's 4-1 in the seventh inning early in the season, if you want to, you can either sub in Acuña for Baty for defense, or you could sub Acuña in for Vientos, slide Baty over to third base, and that's your defensive first infield. But the bottom line right now is the Mets will be without Jeff McNeil for the start of the season, and they will be giving a lot of opportunities to those young players who have been battling it out for opportunities. Now, when it comes to the other injury and the position player groups to discuss, Brandon Nimmo is in the lineup today at DH, so that's going to be really good to check out and see how he looks, and if he can complete this short ramp up. He's got basically 2 weeks from today is opening day, and the Grapefruit League schedule ends, I believe, on Monday the 24th. So, he's got about a 10-day window here to get into a bunch of spring games and, test out that knee. He's DHing today, so obviously they're not ready to throw him out there and have him play 5 innings of left field, but at some point that has to come. Now, to me, I think that's almost the bigger takeaway about this injury is you just have no depth now. The depth that you entered camp with, it's very close to being gone just because you have Nimmo and Marte, where you're still wondering about these knees. Marte has been able to get into a couple games now. Seems like he is going to be good to go for opening day, but we'll knock on some wood on that. And then Nimmo, we'll see what this looks like now that he gets back out there. Last time we saw him in a game, and then immediately he stopped playing for a little bit. So how does Brandon Nimmo respond to getting this start today? If he's good to go, I think the Mets are in a great spot with their roster still because those 2 last spots go to Baty and Acuña, and I don't think there's going to be a real shaky spot on the roster. If all of a sudden Brandon Nimmo goes down, now you're talking about Alex Canario or Jose Azocar making the team, and I just don't know how they would fit those guys into the lineup. I guess the best case scenario then is Jesse Winker's your starting left fielder at the beginning of the year. Maybe your DH platoon is your left field platoon, and maybe Vientos is getting a lot of time at DH with Baty at third and Acuña at second. The Mets do still have good options, but Jeff McNeil is the guy that's supposed to plug in for everybody else when it comes to injuries, and now he's the one that's hurt. So you lose your backup left fielder, your backup right fielder, and your starting second baseman in one fell swoop. Obviously, Acuña can cover up for a lot of that, but you still don't know how his bat's going to translate. And that's obviously the question for Acuña in general, but one that he might get the answer early on. I think the exciting part about this is if one of these 2 guys pops, what will that mean for the Mets? I want to talk about that to close out the show in a second segment. Also, an injury update on Sean Manaea. I'll get to all that in just a minute. First, though, quick word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by Wonderful Pistachios. You're looking for a snack that's both delicious and nutritious. Crack into a great source of protein with Wonderful Pistachios. I told you guys, I'm about to head to Port St. Lucie. These are coming in the car with me. My go-to snack. I love the no-shells varieties. This is my alarm to wake up. How about that? Woke up early to Jeff McNeil news and got an episode of Locked On Mets in there before I hit the road. But Wonderful Pistachios is probably my breakfast today. I love the smoky barbecue flavor. I just tried it yesterday, and it's already a new favorite. And it is one of the no-shell varieties, which are the perfect grab-and-go snack. But if you are interested in the in-shell varieties for that satisfying crunch, Wonderful Pistachios has you covered. It is a complete protein. Each 1 ounce serving has 6 grams of protein, give you 10% of your daily value. Plus, they're packed with fiber and better for you unsaturated fats to help you feel fuller longer. Get snacking and cracking with the snack that packs a protein punch. Visit wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more. Stay up to date with all the latest in the world of sports. You can check out Locked On Sports Today, streaming 24/7 on YouTube. If you're watching on YouTube today, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. Our goal is to get to 13,000 subscribers by opening day. We're within 500, so I appreciate all of you who continue to subscribe. All right, so let's talk real quick about what happens if one of these guys takes off. And I think that's the exciting part of you don't want to say exciting part of an injury, but the one silver lining to an injury is it does create opportunity. And when you have young players that are getting that opportunity, there is that layer of intrigue. Again, I'm about to go up to Port St. Lucie today, and Brett Baty is going to be starting at second base. So how does Baty look defensively? Can he really hold down that position? And he has been red hot in spring. Can Brett Baty carry that over? And all of a sudden, if he is tearing the cover off the ball for the first 2 weeks of the season, for one, it allows you to really ease Jeff McNeil back into the lineup with a oblique that you don't want to play around with, because the last thing you want is for Jeff McNeil to be dealing with an oblique injury all year long. So you can ease him in, you can take your time, but also it might cut into Jeff McNeil's playing time. You might be playing Jeff McNeil in the outfield a little more than you thought. It just depends on the rest of the roster, because now that you have Juan Soto and Brandon Nimmo, left and right field should be pretty plugged up, and there shouldn't be a lot of opportunities, but you just never know. the bottom line here is Brett Baty, you're going to be on the opening day roster, and you're probably going to be in the starting lineup. Of course, there's the chance that the Houston Astros throw Framber Valdez, and maybe the Mets go with Acuña to go right on left to start the season. But I think Baty's going to get more of the opportunities in the early going. And if he can run with it, that's going to be a huge, huge thing for the Mets and a huge thing for Baty. The good thing about second base is the Mets have such a high floor option if they decide to go with Acuña. That's where there's not a bad option in this, because Luisangel Acuña, if he is your starting second baseman, you are going to get exceptional defense up the middle of Francisco Lindor. And he's also going to give you an element of speed to the bases that you don't entirely have in the starting lineup. When Starling Marte is in there, he obviously still brings that layer of speed, at least the base stealing ability. Francisco Lindor can sweep it back. We know that. But Luisangel Acuña is that really ignitable speed where you are watching him as much as you're watching the batter at times because you want to know what he's going to do. So, he does have a lot of excitement to his game that I think fans really gravitate towards. And if you end up getting to a point this year where McNeil has a setback and Baty's not doing it and Acuña is just the answer, with the glove and the speed on the bases alone, I mean, you're looking at a guy that has the floor of being a 2-win player just with the glove. And I made this comp before. You look at Nico Horner with the Cubs, a guy that is just above league average offensively year over year. He might get the 15 home runs and he might steal the 30-40 bases, but overall, when you look at the on base percentage, he'll leave something to be desired, and the stats will grade out to just above league average. And yet he's always a 4-win player because he is a former shortstop that's elite defensively at second base. And you have that on the table with Acuña. So I'm going to be very interested to see how the Mets ultimately decide to split playing time between the two. But I would be shocked if they don't both make the roster at this point. The only way they don't is if you get into that same mode we saw last year where JD Martinez was only supposed to be, ramping up for, 10 days or whatever it was. So the Mets put Mark Vientos in Syracuse because they wanted him to play every day. And they said, all right, it's fine. We'll roster Zach Short. And they definitely missed an opportunity to get Vientos early playing time. And if they did, who knows? Maybe the Mets' entire season is different. Maybe they don't get off that slow of a start. Maybe he, factors his way into the lineup sooner. Or you never know. Maybe he doesn't get to the place that he did defensively at third base. So there's ripple effects on every side of these things. But I do wonder if the Mets maybe learn a lesson from that last year. And instead of saying, McNeil, he's only going to be out for a week, as far as resting this thing, and then he'll ramp himself back up. Let's just put Acuña in AAA because that was the plan anyway. We'll roster Donovan Walton, and once McNeil's good to go, we'll make that swap. And then all of a sudden, Walton's hanging on your roster for a month. I would like to see the Mets just roster the two kids, and I think they probably will do just that. Then again, you'll have a much better understanding of this injury in a week, because if that timeline does line up and he just needs a week to rest, good to go, then all of a sudden you might feel a little more confident that he's going to meet the low end of that 3 to 4 week timetable. Speaking of obliques and cheese, I guess I'm a 2-alarm guy. Apologies to the live audience. We got to get to this game in Port St. Lucie. Last note, Sean Manaea is back throwing with his strand oblique. Started throwing a couple days ago after the MRI showed that everything looks clean. So that is a great, great sign for the New York Mets. If he's now basically starting his spring training over, you look at a 6-week timetable, and you could still see Sean Manaea potentially, if everything breaks right? Let's see, 6 weeks would be 17th. So maybe end of April is still in the cards for Sean Manaea. If they have Sean Manaea back early May, I'm thrilled, but there's still that chance that you get the best possible outcome for Sean Manaea, and he is back, only a couple weeks into the season because he's got 2 weeks of camp here, and then maybe only a month after that if he really is able to get to the short end of that timetable and everything checks out from here, which would obviously be a massive, massive boost to this rotation to get Manaea back on the short end of this thing. And then, we'll see what happens with Jeff McNeil now starting his process from ground one when it comes to an oblique injury. But that's going to be all for this little bonus live edition of Locked On Mets. I was trying to figure out the best way to get the information to the audience as quick as I could because it was announced this early. I didn't want to wait till tomorrow. So now I'm going to wrap up the show, do a little post-production here, hop in the car, and get up to Port St. Lucie. If any of you are there, send me a message on Twitter or something at Finkelstein Ryan so I can catch up with you all. As always, thank you for listening. Make sure you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcasts. If you're watching on YouTube, hit that subscribe button for me. As always, thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen, your first watch every day. Now, for your second watch, head over to YouTube and check out the first ever 24/7 streaming channel that covers everything in the world of sports. Talking about Locked On Sports Today with our local hosts from each team, league-wide hosts from each league. Find Locked On Sports Today streaming 24/7 on YouTube.